And we're live. All right, so you missed all the pre-show shenanigans, but that's okay. I'm sure we'll act all crazy in the meantime. But hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans, it's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the
Space is the
fun in
place.
dysfunction. Without further ado, we're going to let our guest, Mr. Scott Moon, introduce himself.
Oh, God. Hi, everyone. Hey, I'm Scott Moon. I'm a sci-fi writer. I've known JR for quite a bit. I think we kind of met through Galaxy's Edge or something like that. Maybe we knew each other before that. But yeah,
So
I write a lot of science fiction. That's my thing. It's my jam.
So if you become too good a friend of JR as he drags you onto the show, is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, that's how it works. Exactly.
Yeah,
I don't have any other friends otherwise. I stalk the people and I make them like me. I almost said, Doc, when we were doing the intro, I almost said, and JR is the king, but I'm like, no, you'll mock me for it, so I'm just going to pretend like I'm cool and just ride with it.
You're not pretending hard enough.
So the next part of the introduction is actually how we first met them. So I actually found you through the Keystroke medium, through the podcast. I think I found you at like episode 12 of season 1.
That's early on.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then we met
dark, dirty secrets.
Yeah. Then we met in Vegas in 2018 at the 20 Books to 50K conference.
Yeah.
There were stuffed animals involved, taxidermy kind, not like dolls. Doc, stop it! Don't make it weird. And
you're the one who's bringing up furries, not me.
And I didn't say anything about furries. Like, stop that! No, don't go there. They're gonna meme the hell out of that. But anyway, so and booze. There was definitely booze involved.
There was some booze. I'm not gonna lie. In Vegas, I mean, really.
Right, and we was at the was it the Samstown? Is that the name of the hotel?
Samstown. Yeah.
It's the epicenter of hopelessness and despair. That's what it is.
Yeah, it's awesome though. They had that bar in the middle where the Eagle show played every like 45 minutes.
Yeah, that was annoying, but it was cool to meet with everyone and just like chat.
Yeah, the animatron Eagles would like take off and screech, and there'd be music and fireworks, and then we'd go back to drinking. It was fantastic.
And sometimes we drank through it because it made it more bearable.
Yeah, true.
No wonder JR came back from that con so traumatized.
No, the horrible part about that hotel is the smoke was so thick. Like even in a non-smoking room, my CPAP machine, I had to throw away all the plastic. It came back yellow from all the smoke in the air.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was bad.
Harsh.
Although you did get you got your steps in walking around the place, which I guess that's the good thing about Vegas. So, all right, Doc, did you know him before today's episode?
No, I did not. You said, "Hey, come here. I have a friend." And I went, "Are you sure?"
And he came to see proof of friend. There you go.
Yes.
for Nick, we worry about proof of life. For JR, we worry about proof of friend.
But you notice he's hiding in his car, so he didn't want anyone else to know we're friends. He's like, "No,
pictures didn't happen." Yeah,
right.
I got pulled over actually, waiting for my
in an undisclosed location.
Yes, undisclosed location. Now, if he was Nick Cole, he'd be doing this at night with like the light giving it the noir effect. Now, listen here, kids. See here.
Yeah. In a dark parking garage someplace.
Absolutely.
The only reason I knew he wasn't drunk was because he was driving.
Yeah. Fortunately, I'm stationary, so that makes things a little bit easier concerning my driving habits.
All right, Doc. The next one is you. You get to ask him the religion question. This is an important one.
Okay, so Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly?
There is a wrong answer.
My God, that's so hard. It can't be like what's the Trinity? The Trinity can't have all three and do the Trinity. No, I'd probably go. I'm gonna have to go with Star Wars, depending on which part of Star Wars you're going with.
You get to pick.
Empire Strikes Back.
Okay,
that is my favorite.
That is acceptable.
Now we move on. They just announced they're doing a new Star Wars movie.
No, they're not. They did 3, and it's just a shame.
Yeah, no, they're gonna do they're bringing back what's his name who played Anakin as a teenager and everything.
Wow. Okay.
I thought looking at the picture, the guy who played Obi-Wan aged much better.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. Well, so is that the Kenobi trailer or is that a different one?
Kenobi.
Yeah, we'll see. I try to remain, I go into those just like I try to wipe my brain before I go in and just watch it like I never saw it because I know I'm going to be so
Well,
put
you know
out
how
if
to
I
tell
think
a
about it
true
too hard.
Star Wars fan, right?
Who's
What
not a
is
true
that?
Star Wars fan?
You know how to tell a true Star Wars fan
Oh, yeah.
leaving a movie theater. They're the ones crying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And usually angry. Yeah.
I didn't say
Yeah.
they were sad tears. They're like angry.
Tears of
Really?
rage.
Space Vespas? Really? I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Like, couldn't
Oh
have at
my
least had
God.
fuel
That,
box?
yeah.
Oh my god.
That was a new low. The Space Vespas were literally the new low, which, yeah.
And they, it's just me because I've been in a desert before. They were too clean. Like in this backwater
Exactly.
planet that's supposed to be run down. Boba Fett
Everything
showed
was
us
too
that
clean.
everything was too
Yeah.
clean.
Well, the Space Vespa reminds me of that Austin Powers scene where he's in the little golf cart trying to turn it around under
Yeah.
the bunker. That's what it was about. Like,
See, this is why we're friends, Doc. He knows. He gets
You
it.
keep saying that. Do you know what that word means? No, I'm kidding.
Sure. Go on. Continue.
Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, or The Wheel of Time?
Game of Thrones.
Really?
Oh yeah.
I didn't think
I
you'd
like
go for the grimdark.
I like the darker stuff. So I like Game of Thrones, but I like Bernard Cornwell. If you're reading his stuff, it's a lot of his
Sharp stuff.
historical fiction. Yeah, well, Sharps is really good, but then he has a bunch like Saxon Chronicles and things, and it's very similar as far as the level of everybody. Life is cheap in those types of settings. So yeah, I like this. It's a little more intense.
So, did you like Stargate Universe since it was the grittier of the Stargate franchises?
I don't think I saw it somewhere. I fell off the since I work nights, my entire adult life and on call outs a lot. I fell behind on a lot of the real classic sci-fi, like all the Next Generation stuff and everything. And so Stargate, I watched very intermittently, and I tried to go back and watch the whole thing from the beginning, like a year ago, and I couldn't do it. It was not what I
Campy
remembered.
goodness.
Yeah.
It's
Oh yeah.
campy
I
and
was like,
good.
especially that first episode. I'm like, oh my God. And so then I fell off and started watching some other things.
It's easier to cope with the nostalgia effect or like
Mm-hmm.
the nostalgia telling you that, I love this, but it's really not as great as I thought if you make a drinking game out of it.
Yeah, there you go. See,
So,
I didn't do any pre-gaming for it. I probably would have
there you
made
go.
it a lot easier.
So, I guess it
Yeah.
depends on your ability to tolerate cringe and cheese factors in movies because I don't mind.
Obviously, it's high if he's your friend.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all
Yeah,
about the B movies, right? Like, give me
it
some
depends.
werewolf
Like,
space Nazis. Like, I'm down.
I went back and watched Escape from New York, the first one, and other than the fact that the intro was really slowly paced, compared to the makes now, I actually really loved it, and mostly it's because there was some really good characterization. The dialogues were awesome. Kurt Russell had some great lines, even though he didn't talk that much. But I remember watching it, and there's like this scene where this helicopter lands for like a minute and a half. I'm like, they would not take 90 seconds on that. That would have been, if they even showed it, it would have been like a 4-second clip as the helicopter comes in. But they showed the whole thing, like you're at an air show or something. Like, wow, we've come a long ways in our cinematography.
I definitely think it's changed stylistically how we do things.
It's like cultural ADD.
Yeah, exactly. We definitely, things move on at much greater clip. I think if you go look at a movie, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a scene that's longer than a minute or two long, like in one place. It's very smash cut, this, there, and all that stuff.
And
anyway,
there's a reliance too much on CGI instead of quality character
not my
acting
favorite.
too.
Yeah, that's like I watched World War Z, and I thought this is going to be the worst pile of crap ever because the previews made it look like it's all about the special effects, but that was actually really good as far as movies go. I really enjoyed that one. Not really
I've
sci-fi,
heard
but
good things about it, but it falls under the zombie movie stuff, and I don't do zombies.
yeah, this is a good one. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know. As you say, it's one of those ones where, like, if you like that kind of stuff, the book was definitely better. I don't say that all the time. I'm not like a zealot in that regard, but the short stories were.
Oh yeah.
So
all
right.
Moving past this foray into multimedia and going back to your development as an author, what was your first love, sci-fi or fantasy, Scott?
My first love was fantasy. I started when I was very young, and I played Dungeons and Dragons, and basically that's how I got started. My mom said we should write a book for kids your age. I was like 12, and I was playing lots of Dungeons and Dragons, and so I started a big dungeon dive orc battle thing I wrote on a bunch of legal pads,
Oh
and then it
wow.
just, yeah, then it went from there, and then eventually got where I could use a computer and print it on dot matrix. It was great. It was, we were high tech back then. So
Do you still have that?
my mom says she does, but she's got a lot of stuff. So I'd have to go dig through some of her storage items to see if we have. I do have a bunch of notebooks. When I was about 16, I wrote a fantasy novel called The Sword Peddler, and I wrote it out on mead tablets by hand. And I remember writing, like, I'd be at like family events, like extended family events, like Thanksgiving, at the dinner table writing at the table. And they would give me a hard time, but it didn't give me too much of a hard time because they're like, I guess if that's the worst thing he's doing, we're going to let him read at the dinner table. And so I would do that. But yeah, I still have those, and they're torn to crap too, because I doodled all over them, and there's like 15 of them, because there's only like 60 pages in one of those, because I was in junior high or whatever. I guess we've been in high school 16, but yeah. So I have some of that stuff laying around. It's probably frighteningly bad, I'm sure.
See, when I tried to escape the family gatherings, I got called back.
Yeah, I got called back, but yeah, it's just interesting. There's a lot of room to sit there and do your own thing.
So were they shocked when you published your first novel, or were like, it took them long enough?
No, they were. So the funny thing is my sister, she sent me a link about KDP. Well, because I had been submitting stuff traditionally since, like, seriously, I started doing it like in the early 90s, and I'd had lots of rejections. I had one book I submitted, and the entire rejection process took 7 years, but they would say, yeah, it made it past the first editor, and if it goes to this one, eventually it'll get to the requisitions editor. I was all excited. And then, like every 6 to 8 months, I would send a polite email, or actually I think I might even mailed a letter back then. I can't remember. And they would respond with, well, yeah. And I forgot about it because they quit responding. And then so 7 years after I submitted, I got a really nice detailed letter about how the reader who first read it really enjoyed it, thought I should keep writing, but they weren't going to take it at this time. I'm like, I can't wait 7 years between submissions.
Too long.
And that was I believe that was with, I want to say it was with Tor, but it might have been with DAW. It might have been DAW Books. But anyway, so I did all that, and then, but like a year before I published my first self-published book, my sister had sent me a thing about KDP, and I'm not a real super techie guy, and so I kind of like, yeah, it looks neat, but I didn't really read the email for like almost a year, and finally I looked at it, and I was like, I'm going to try this. And if I would have started a year earlier, I think things would have been a lot different, because that would have put me right in those cowboy days where people were like, where it was much less competition, and almost anything you wrote would do at least pretty good, So, less you learn as you go.
And now, from now on, he reads the emails his sister sends him.
Oh yeah. Read them and take action immediately. Yeah.
Does she give you a hard time about that still?
Because if you were my brother, I'd totally be writing your ass about that.
No, she's got plenty of other things to write me about. I'm a target-rich environment for those types of things. Now my sister's not.
So someone's gonna have fun when you make it big and you're like the biggest thing ever, and they're writing your autobiography. They're gonna be like, "We'll have no problem filling this book."
Yeah. There'll be material, I'm sure. Probably most of it really embarrassing.
So, what is your first memory engaging in speculative fiction? Is it reading, watching it, playing it, listening to your sister gab about boys? That's kind of fictional.
Well, fortunately, I'm older than my sister, so I didn't have to put up with that until I was old enough to understand what was going on. But my first memory is I wrote a short story in third grade, and I remember that it was about lots of like tube travel, like around the top of a city. And I don't remember much else about the story other than that. But I wrote it in third grade because it was an assignment, and it was the only thing I'd ever been praised for by a teacher up to that point, and basically since, after that. And so I immediately identified myself as somebody who can write, even though that was probably not what they meant at the time, because like I remember that about the same time I had a parent-student conference, and I would get really low grades. I'd get like C's and D's most of the time, and they said, "Well, he gets all the right answers. He's just too slow. He doesn't finish in time." And so I think I would like try too hard to get the perfect answer, or for whatever reason, it just took me longer, and so I would not finish, and so I wouldn't get all the points, and so I'd get very low grades. But they said they weren't worried about that said I would eventually get it. So that was the type of feedback I generally got. And then I had the feedback about that same time, like, hey, this is a really great story you wrote. And from then on, I was all about writing stories. That was my thing.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I guess the takeaway lesson is the first thing you're praised for as a child might be a big deal by teachers. Get real deep here all of a sudden. There you go.
I was thinking the first thing I probably praised my child for was how hard he can swing his can hit something.
Well, that's good. You know, there's uses for that.
No
Probably
wonder.
character one of my stories.
Yeah, I'm going to my son wanting to be a jock. It makes no sense to me.
They always do what you don't think they're going to do. That's the crazy thing. I've got 4 of them now, and none of they're all defying expectations. Let's just put it that way. So I love them to death.
They are adventures, but is that what you love about speculative fiction? What is it that brings you joy in speculative fiction and draws you in?
I love going to a new place, and to me, it's like the ultimate form of entertainment. I also remember very clearly, I remember literally sitting at home, because I'd come home after school. My mom and dad worked like 3 jobs all the time. And so I'd come home and it'd just be me in the house, usually because my sister was at a babysitter at that time, because I was a little bit older. And I remember coming home, it'd be just me sitting in the house, and I'd be so bored. And I remember thinking, I hate being bored. And you can almost feel, and I became like a massively chronic daydreamer. I was always daydreaming because there were like 3 channels. They went off at midnight. Eventually we got a VCR, because I'm 52, so I'm dating myself a little bit. And we got a VCR, but it was like one of these really big VCRs, because my mom was the audiovisual supervisor or whatever at the high school. She's a librarian too. And so we would be allowed to take those home in the summertime to like care for them in the summer. All the technical equipment, pre-computer stuff. And so we'd have a VCR, basically, long story short, that all I had on the video to watch was the cartoon Ricky Tikki Taffy, The Hobbit, the cartoon, and then I think we had managed to record In-Laws, which was like a movie back in the 70s, and that's like all I had to watch. So the entertainment that was available when I was a kid was super low, and so I mean you could make things in the dirt or you could have an imagination, and that's what I went with. So I did both, of course. Good stuff.
That's a good
but
answer.
That's what I love about it, is just because you can get a lot of entertainment mileage out of a book or a daydream or watching a movie that you're really into. I mean, I really like to be entertained. I don't like to be bored. Short answer.
So I have a friend who claims that I'm allergic to it because I seem to pick up more hobbies.
Yep. I got a lot of hobbies.
There's actually been some studies there's been some studies that say that the sitting alone with your thoughts, which is what sort of fosters creativity, and the fact that so many people nowadays are just glued to their electronical devices, and that's why you're seeing so many reboots of everything, because they're like, well, human creativity is dying. Although I think they're just not looking in the right places, but I think there's something to that, like that.
No, I think that the major media just wants a guaranteed sell.
Yeah, they want money. That's a money thing. But I do think that we need to spend more time individually, or just in the cathedral of silence a little bit. Like, I never did it because I'm always listening to music or a podcast or something I drive. When I met my wife, she'd never radio in her car, and she was like, well, sometimes I'll have to just drive with no music on. I'm like, you are crazy. But now I find myself driving to work with everything turned off. Like, I don't want anybody talking to me. I don't want to listen to a podcast. I'm just going to drive for 20 minutes and just think. And I'm like, that's actually pretty refreshing. It's kind of like a reset.
See, that can be dangerous too, because if you get sucked into your thoughts, that's how accidents happen.
Yeah, well, that's how I wind up in Salina instead of at work, because I took the wrong turn and drove 80 miles north. But
oops.
Oopsies. Got to daydreaming. Wound up in another state. Sorry.
So you mentioned that your sister gave you the first inkling that KDP was out there, but when do you remember as like that moment where you transitioned from like, I'm going to enjoy the stories to I'm going to write my own? Because it sounds like that started really early, but do you remember that defining moment where you said,
no, it was when I was 12 years old, and my mom said we should write a book for kids your age. at the time they didn't really have middle grade fiction, and so it was kind of, and so I started writing. But I remember thinking I'm gonna, and so all from that point on, I was like, I wanted that to be my job. And like when I worked at a movie theater when I was in high school, I would had a notebook and I would write stories, and I was going to buy a red Corvette, and because I was going to be so successful. And so I would be writing like, I want to do this professionally. I mean, this would be the life, because I could do all my hobbies. You know, I could get up, write for a few hours. I could go to the gym. I could go, do martial arts. I could do whatever. And I just had my lifestyle planned out. I was going to be a writer and have lived this lives of adventure and whatnot. But that's when she said we should write a book for kids your age. That was all it took. That was my thing. I was like, this is what I'm going to do.
Did you hear that news story where there was this kid, he was like 11 or 12, and he had to write a book for a school project, and he was so proud of it. He laminated every page, put it in a spiral binder, and dropped it off at the library and just slid it into the stacks, and people kept checking it out even though it wasn't a real book. That reminds me a little bit about you telling us of your childhood.
Yeah.
You were that child who would have done that.
Yeah. Well, when I was real little, I didn't understand how books got made into hardbacks, really. I'm talking like when I was like 6 or 7, or I don't know how little I was, but we would go for Christmas, and I'd always ask for notepads and books, but I wanted journals because they were hardback. And my thing is, you write it in the hardback, and then maybe it would become it's like having a hardback book. And so I was always handwriting them in these journals. My grandma was a big garage sailor, so she would always come up with stuff she would find, and I always had these journals and notepads I was writing in. That's literally what I get for Christmas every year. My life was a big stack of legal pads and pens.
Did you at least get like fancy pens?
That works.
Yeah.
Did you get like fancy pens, like fountain pens or like cool pens, or was it just Bic?
Sometimes, yeah. It's kind of hit or miss. Depends. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I had my one of my squads at work. I had talked about how I'd really like going to the Office Max and buying a fresh pad of paper, even though I don't really write on paper that much anymore. And so one day I came there and they'd gotten me this really high, what's the paper weight?
Yeah.
High quality legal pads, and this big old pencil, like one that's like as big as your thumb that you had when you were in kindergarten. And they had this giant pencil, and so I used it. I'd be sitting there in my office when I was a sergeant writing with that big kindergarten pencil on my notepad. Good time.
I love it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So many authors will let their own real life experiences influence the stories they tell. So do you think there were any specific formidable moments that shaped the kind of storyteller you became?
I think so. And because one of the things is I realized I was going to have to work, and I'd always pick, like I wanted to go to the military real bad, and I couldn't, they disqualified me because of migraines. But I wanted to go in there because I figured, what a better way than to see some more of the world. And I bought the recruiting poster. Obviously, you know more about it than I do. But when I eventually became a police officer, it was the same thing. I'm like, I'm going to see a lot of interesting things that I wouldn't see otherwise. And so I became a police officer because maybe not looking for specific examples to put in books, but to look general things. Like confront evil and things like that. And I thought that might help me with my writing.
That's
which actually did.
Isn't he?
Yeah, and so when in 2004, 2005, I was on the BTK task force, BTK is a serial killer. It was in Wichita, and he disappeared for like 30 years, and then he made a reappearance. And I was in a gang unit at the time, and I got put on that task force with me and like a bunch of other people, and I did it for 11 months. And I remember thinking a lot about what it takes to be that kind of evil and why somebody would torture people to death and stuff like that. And so when I was writing urban fantasy, some of my characters are pretty dark. It's probably why my urban fantasy doesn't sell that well, because some of it's pretty dark. So it did have an influence, trying to wrestle with the nature of evil and why people do the crappy things they do to each other. It's a question I still haven't answered, but who knows?
That's a question as old as time.
I think one of those questions where when we have the answer, we're not going to like the answer.
Oh yeah, the answer is not good. The answer is definitely not a good thing.
So
that reminds me of that expression. I think my 10th grade history teacher told us. That's the old proverb, "May you live in interesting times." And when I asked him what it meant, he's like, when you're old enough to understand it, you'll wish you didn't. And that was all he would say.
Yeah. Yeah,
And now we
we're
live in
definitely
interesting
in.
times, and I'm like, you son of a biscuit eater. All right.
Yeah, exactly. We're definitely in some interesting times. My oldest daughter just took our dog for a walk, so because I'm
So,
facing our apartment, so
so we here
that's
at
why
the
I'm always
Blast,
looking around.
we just figured you want a stakeout, and you were just,
Yeah.
plain close. So
Dang it! I
we
should have
here
said that.
we here at the Blasters and Blades podcast are a couple of nerdy veterans. So it says in your bio, and we talked about it already, that you were in the military. So how do you feel like, other than the darkness from the VTK time to your urban fantasy, how do you feel like your time in uniform affects the way you tell stories, even still?
Well, the biggest thing about it is the brotherhood and the camaraderie and the sense of identity. So to clarify, and a lot of people get mistake this because I'm more of a what do you call it, a fanboy of the military. I'm a huge fan, but I was never able to actually get out in the military. I applied for the Marines, and when I was in college, and I went to MEPS. I did all that stuff. I was in some officer candidate pools. And then after about a year and a half, that this was a Gulf War One time. After Gulf War One ended, they started downsizing, and they looked at my medical records a little more closely, and like, no, no, thanks. So I never did, and but I really value and respect the military. And when I went into the police department, I thought that's the next best thing I can do. I learned that they're very different. They're more like law enforcement, civilian law enforcement, and military are more like cousins than brothers, I guess, because you got different roles. But to answer your question, being in uniform, um, a lot of my stories are, of course, about brotherhood or sisterhood, or groups of people that are coming together for whatever reason, and it just kind of shows you what it matters to really have to watch over the person next to you and have them watch over for you. I know it's really cliche, but it really does matter who your closest coworkers, and that's what I really value about it the most, is that sense of brotherhood and belonging
That
and
found
working
family
towards
aspect.
something. Yeah, and you're working, and most people are very idealistic. When you go into the military or law enforcement, you want to be a hero. Nobody goes into it wanting to be a bad guy, or do things that the public doesn't like, but you go in wanting to save the day, and so you're around people that have similar values. Like, I'm doing this, I'm going to make a self-sacrifice for the greater good, and it's going to be awesome.
So I do think you sell yourself a little short on the whole military thing, because I can tell you, as a grunt, and we're SWAT. We both were trained to clear a room. The difference is
Oh
I
yeah,
didn't have to care if the guy on the other end of my rifle came out alive. You did. That changes the dynamics a
yeah.
lot. Sometimes,
That's the big thing. No, we don't get to do some. Well, we rarely get to do suppressive fire. Although there's a few instances, I've been on one or two SWAT calls where it was used, but those are very long stories, and there was very good reason to use them. But yeah, it's a little sketchy sometimes.
but when you go
Dude,
into a
I was
fight,
taught as a medic, suppressive fire is the best form of preventive medicine.
It is.
yes.
I agree 100%.
So one of the things, if you've done any kind of martial arts, you realize is when you're fighting not to lose or not to hurt the other person, you're at a severe disadvantage.
Oh yeah,
And so, like, you guys, it's not an easy job you do, so just don't sell yourself short. But moving along,
yeah.
because we don't make short jokes, because Doc will start making them about me. Do you ever draw?
Are
5'9" is not short. You hush. I'm painfully average. Do you ever draw from people you knew when you served with in law enforcement?
you said it, not me.
Yeah, I do, and fortunately, I have a lot of my law enforcement friends are. Of course, the sun's going down here, which the view is nice what I'm looking at, but pretty soon you're going to just be looking at Shadow Man here. But that's okay, man. I can go into the story somehow. But I do have a lot of friends who are currently and were in the military. I think I lost track of the question.
So do you incorporate those people into your
Oh
stories,
yeah,
the people you know in
I
uniform?
yeah I do. Inadvertently, everybody kind of comes into a hodgepodge. So I try not to use individual characters specifically, although I have a few exceptions. So when I was writing my Alien Invasion series, I was pushing a deadline, and I called my lieutenant. I was a sergeant at the time. I said, "Hey, I need the day off because I got to finish this book." And he says, all right, I'll give it to you, but you got to put me in the book. And because he was going to have to basically be a lieutenant and a sergeant that day. And I said, okay. And I said, well, how do you want to die? And he's like, what are you talking about? I said, well, normally in science fiction, we take people and we redshirt them. He's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, come on, man, you have to watch Star Trek. He said, I put you in a book. I send you down on a mission. You get brutally killed in action, and you're a hero. And he goes, no. He goes, that's not what I'm looking for. I said, so you want to live and kick ass? He goes, yeah, I want to live and kick ass. So you have to be a main character. He's like, yeah. I'm like, fine. And so I made him a character, and his name is Christopher Halloran in the Alien Invasion series. And he's like an ex-recon Marine because he was a Marine. And he's like now works for this private company as a security head of forces. But since I put him in there, made him a badass, but then I decided to just basically nearly kill him so many times that he's about 2/3 cyborg by the end of the series. He was okay with that because by the end he's got like a chain gun mounted to his arm and stuff, and he's like, yeah, that's cool. I can live with that. So
That's
yeah,
awesome.
but so that's one story about how and then I have a couple of rookies. I needed some names, and they were teasing some of the rookies in my current squad, and I said, okay, I'm going to put these guys in there. So I put two of my newest officers in as archangels, which are like side characters, but they're like kind of like one of the main characters' bodyguards, and they wear like powered armor, and they're just young and gung ho and ready to blow things up. And so
like
I have a good time with them. Yeah,
Yeah, like every rookie.
and they enjoy it. And I gave them the books, and one of them, well, I'm not sure if they both read them, but one's like started listening to the audiobooks, and he's like, damn, these are good. I'm like, see, I'm not kidding. Thought I was at work. Everybody kind of treats it like a joke. Like last night, we went to a standoff where ATF and some of our tactical guys had surrounded some people and got him in his house, and it was probably gonna be a SWAT call. Well, I showed up because it's on my bureau, and the negotiator knows I'm a writer. He goes, so how are you gonna write the ending for this one, Moon? What are we gonna have? Like some sort of fantasy fairies in the attic come down and get him? I says, no, I'm thinking space lasers on this one. And they think they get a kick out of it. But I do have a growing number of people at work that have actually read my books and will come by and tell me, what they think of them. Usually pretty positive. So, yeah,
that's cool. So
it's fun. We have fun with it. We hang a lot of trash on each other, and that's just an easy one for me. They're like, "What are you going to put in there? Dragons?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, definitely dragons." Whatever.
So we talk about how your time in uniform affects the way you tell the stories. Now let's talk about how it affects the way you engage with content as a consumer. So do you feel like, having been surrounded by people in the military and working in law enforcement, that when you read or consume fiction, that it changes how you interact with it?
Yeah, I think so. Fortunately, I'm such a consumer of entertainment that I have a. It'll sound weird when I say stoic view of entertainment, because that makes me sound like you're all grim. But stoicism is really kind of accepting what you can change what you can, and accepting what you can't, blah blah blah. So I go into, like we're talking about Star Wars, I go in there knowing it's going to piss me off, and so I'll be like, these are the parameters in which I'm going to watch this Star Wars movie. I'm going to try to ignore all the movies that came before and just watch this one so I can enjoy it. And I say that to say, when I watch like a military movie, I know it's probably going to get a lot of stuff wrong and anger me, but I'll just decide, am I watching a campy, kind of not really realistic, cop story or military story, or am I watching something that's pretty gritty? Like I watched Mosul. I'm probably saying that wrong. Have you seen that one, JR? Mosul.
Avoid that.
Mosul. Yeah, I watched that, and that was really intense. It was hard to watch. It was probably, it wasn't realistic, but it was less wrong, I guess, in a lot of the tactics. And then I watched just for the first time Sicario last night, and that's also not realistic, but it doesn't have like the goofy car chases, and people don't get shot in the gut and then come up later and say, "Oh, look, I was shot the whole time, but now I'm okay," and stuff. So I guess the answer to your question is, it does affect a lot, because I go in there expecting that this is not going to be real. I'm going to see all kinds of things wrong with it, and I'm going to do my best not to tell my wife, who's sitting next to me, how wrong it is, because she doesn't like that.
I totally tell everyone how wrong it is when I watch history movies.
Oh yeah,
And I'm like, no, that's not right. You see that 12th button? They wouldn't have had that one. Okay,
Yeah,
I'm not that bad,
exactly.
but
Yeah. No, I definitely have my moment. It depends also on whether I'm in public or at home. Because at home I'll pause
fair,
it and
fair.
go like, we have to talk about this crap. This is dumb.
So transitioning a bit away into the fan angle, which you kind of touched on a bit. Have you had any cool fan art yet?
I do well, and it's mostly through the Reaper books. So Jeff Cheney has a Facebook page. I think it's Jan Cheney's Renegade Readers,
Yep.
and and they will put, and they've had several times where they've taken like the book cover and then like Photoshop different things in, like either Jeff's picture and my picture into the main characters, or some funny social thing that's going on right now with memes, and so we get a bunch of that. That's the main place where I've had
You
the
haven't had
fan
to
art,
write
which
like a speeding ticket to anybody who's actually a fan yet, have you? That might be awkward.
no, um, no, I have not. But that's I watched the thing with the character. What's the character who plays Jon Snow?
Yeah,
What's that?
I know the actor you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, and you've probably seen the interview, and I'll keep it short because it's not really about what we're talking about. But I watched an interview where he got pulled over, and the trooper, whoever, asked him something about that, and he says, "Well, I'm coming back in the next season." And the trooper said, "Carry on, Lord Commander." And it didn't give him a ticket. So I thought it was funny, but
That is
I've
funny.
never,
I think it's hilarious.
I've
So,
never had any. Go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to ask, has anyone asked for your autograph yet?
I have had that several at 20 books. I've had that happen a few times, and then a few times locally too. When people find out, and they'll get a copy of my book. I had a lady, I had a couple of ladies that wanted me to sign my Dark Landing books I did with Craig Martell, and one of them, she said, "I've read the entire series 10 times," and that's 12 books. And I was
That's a
like,
lot of
"Wow,
reading.
you're a super fan. Thank you." And it made me feel really good, obviously.
So, what was it like the first time somebody asked for your signature?
It's really cool, but I also, you get a little bit of imposter syndrome. I'm like, I can't. I'm like, "You really want my signature?" And so I'll sign it, and you panic, and you try to think of what to write, and sometimes you think of something clever, um, and then sometimes you just sign your name if you can't think of anything. So, and they're fine with it either way usually.
That's fair. We all have our less than witty days. Like
Yeah.
JR, he has them 350 days a year.
Poor JR. He must have his mic muted. He's not defending
I
himself.
did. I was gonna say something, but it's a good thing, there was 4 letters involved, but it's all good. I made the mistake of telling her the first time someone asked me for my autograph. I was so excited I misspelled my name. But I mean, come on, I don't write cursive that often, all right? Like, how often
Yeah,
do you actually
exactly.
use cursive these days?
Oh yeah, you can't read my signature at all.
But
The
if you're
cool,
signing your name for a book, they kind of want to be able to read it, right?
yeah. Well,
So,
yeah.
so you got to go a little
Well,
I try to
slower.
be cool.
here's the thing. It needs to be consistently enough the same that it can be verified as being your signature.
Right. Yeah. There you go.
Fair, fair.
The the coolest the coolest fan story I've ever had was, so my wife and I go work out at this place called Orange Theory, and one of our coaches there is real nice. Well, and she said that her dad had read my books, and for some reason I assumed that and we had this conversation several times over a course of a month. She would mention it, and so I assumed that she had told her dad that one of her clients wrote books, and then she looked me up, and then he read them and he liked them, because I've had that happen a few times. People will mention, "Hey, so and so writes," and then they look it up and they read the books and like, "Yeah, they like your book," and it makes you feel very good. But what actually happened was her dad was talking to her about a book he had just read by a guy named Scott Moon, and she was like, "I know him," and he was like, "What are you talking about?" And so they went and they figured out, and it was actually, he was reading one of my books, but he wasn't introduced to anybody I know, so it was like a true organic, out in the wild fan thing, and I was that was really amazing to me. That's when I felt like I'm making some progress in this book publishing thing.
So speaking of progress in the book publishing thing, this is the part of the interview where Scott Moon gets to tell us everything he's written. So can we get the Reader's Digest version of your body of work, the highlight reel, as it were?
This is like the question I get all the time from people when they first find out I write. They're like, "How many books have you published?" And I'm like, "I don't know," and they look at me like I'm retarded or something. But because it's hard to calculate the way Amazon, because Amazon tells me I've written like 48 books or something, but I know some of those are novellas, so I don't count them, blah, blah, blah. But so the short answer is I have the Chronicle of Ken Rowland's trilogy, which is sci-fi, military sci-fi-ish. I have the Son of a Dragon Slayer trilogy, which is urban fantasy. It's basically cops go to a magical world. I have the Dark Landing series, which is 12 novellas, and that's a space western. It would be basically if you mix Firefly and Tombstone into a storyline. So that's the premise of that. There is Brothers in Arms, which is a military sci-fi trilogy published by Aethon. I have They Came for Blood, which is my 4-book alien invasion series in basically contemporary times. There is The Last Reaper is my most well-known series, and it's 15 books. I'm writing the 15th book right now, and that one started out. The pitch I gave was, okay, what if you had a decommissioned Death Star? What would you do with it? I think you could write a story on a decommissioned Death Star because it would have a tiny bit of power, to preserve it for salvage and whatnot. And I decided it could be a prison. And I said, what if you had Escape from New York on a decommissioned Death Star? And Jeff Cheney said, write me an outline. So the next day I spent 6 hours writing an outline, and we went over it and we tweaked it a little bit, and I went off to the races with that.
So that, not to interrupt, but that universe, that story he's talking about is actually in his Renegade Star universe, correct?
Yes, that is. And so one of the conditions was I had to, and I didn't have to, I read a whole bunch of his books to make sure I was kind of making things fit.
So we actually just recently, a couple episodes back, reviewed the Renegade Star. So if you're curious, Saska and I did a book review of that series more than just the book. So you should check that out too. It links to the universe he's writing in, to give you a little more insight, which is a lot of fun. I like that universe.
If you were a great fan and you went and bought the book and then you read it, because there was at least one person who commented that they bought the book afterwards. This is what you need to read next.
Oh, I get lots of hate mail from people who tell me we make their to-be read pile grow. I'm like, well, you shouldn't have fed it water after midnight.
I'm just pretty sure every time I turn off the lights or my back is turned long enough, then my to-be read pile seems to breed. It could be because people keep making more books.
It's a thing. It's science. It happens.
I've asked a few of the authors I really, really like if they could just not publish for a year or two so I could catch up. Because some people like Scott are just prolific, and I'm like, just give me some breathing room. I can only read so fast. But while all of those series sound fascinating, but today we're here to talk about your Blue Sun Armada series. So, where did you get the premise for this universe? How'd you come up with the idea for the series?
So this is a series I developed the premise 3 or 4 times, and I was going to go with different publishers, but eventually I did it myself. So the premise of the Blue Sun Armada is that, because when you write science fiction, you're like, I'm not super sciencey because I'm not that smart, but I do know that space travel is hard on the human body, right? With all the radiation and gravities and, time dilation and all kinds of things that can be bad to you. So the premise is 10 or 20,000 years prior to the story, humanity is going to explore the galaxy. They've got just enough technology to do it, but they're still kind of squishy. So they build these cyborgs, which are basically very human cyborgs that have nanites and stuff in them and some things that help them survive the rigors of space travel. But they don't want these cyborgs to go out and build machine planets or machine colonies. So they programmed them to believe they're human, and they're incapable of believing they're not human, even though they're clearly not. And so when the story starts, it's 10,000 years in the future, and they basically, the planet that they have colonized, they're having this huge mech battle war, and they're really into mech warfare. And the main character gets betrayed, kind of Game of Thrones style, and decides that he's going to lead this expedition to find the homeworld, which they call the Blue Sun. later on, if you read, it's a little bit of a spoiler, but not really. As they go through, he realizes that they're not talking about a blue sun; they're talking about a blue planet, which is Earth. So the problem is that they're not human, but they think they are, and they're going to meet their creators who really have no more use for them because they've done their job, and there's going to be problems. So that's the basic premise of the story. There's a lot of nuances, lots of characters, but yeah, it's super fun to write. I love the characters. It's one of my favorite ones I've done yet.
Okay, now I'm going to have to buy it, and my budgeteer person that does my budgeting is going to hate me, and it'll all be your fault, Scott. So don't spend it all in one place.
Yeah, there you
But
go. I'm going to buy some lights for this car.
Yeah, you got the raccoon thing going on. It's perfect.
Yeah,
But before we do that, we're going to take a moment where we dig into this cover. So, what's the story on this artwork? I really like it. Is it a Tom Edwards?
It's a Tom Edwards. It's one of at the time I got it actually on one of his pre-made deals, and you know Tom Edwards, he does this pre-mades like once a year, and I got on there and bought it like 4 seconds after the auction opened, and I tried to buy like 4 others, but this is the only one I could get. And so then afterwards, I bought some other ones, and I had some more custom ones done to finish out the series. But this is like the perfect, when I saw like this is the perfect cover, and it actually informed the story. A lot of my stories will change when I get a really good book cover, because this really put the image of them fleeing the planet in my head, you know, because you can see in that they're kind of coming out of the atmosphere. There's a bunch of people they're getting out of Dodge. So it's like, you know, Cyborg, Battlestar Galactica is taking off right there.
Well, I'm here for it. So, before we dig into the book, we're going to pause for a moment where we shamelessly show for the man, and I'm going to hit this commercial.
Here comes your next romp in the graveyard. In Hunters for Hire, a new urban fantasy adventure by best-selling author Jonathan Yanez. A guy down on his luck puts sign twirling and rideshare driving on the back burner to track down the supernatural for a pretty penny. Find out what happens when John Hunter enters the secret underworld. Download your copy and start listening today. Now available on Amazon and Audible.
So
I'm sorry, I just have to say that narrator sounds like he's trying to hit on somebody.
So I was about to say this. So we were previewing this commercial when Jonathan sent it to us for this show, and I was listening to it. And you know, I'm hard of hearing. I lost some hearing because of the IET. So I'm like, Mom, just listen to this and tell me if it sounds okay. She's like, man, he sounds hot. Is he single? And all I could think of is, Mom, you're married.
Mom,
it's weird. Mom. So
I love your mom.
That was a little awkward, and I blame Jonathan for all of it. It's all his fault. I told him, and he didn't feel sorry at all. He goes, "Well, did it make you want to buy the book?" Sorry. Yeah, he's like, "Well, did it make you want to buy the book?"
It made his mom want to buy the book, that's for sure.
Right, or at least the audiobook. So let's move on to the story itself. So can you give us the 30-second elevator pitch for the Blue Sun Armada?
The 30-second elevator pitch, oh God. Blue Sun Armada is a family saga, military sci-fi in the spirit of Battlestar Galactica meets Game of Thrones, as they fight their way across the galaxy to discover their origins. On the way, they're going to learn that things are not as they seem. They're not actually human, and their human creators don't appreciate them anymore. They don't have a use for them, and they're going to have to find their place in this new order. And then they're going to be at peace or at war eternally.
So that's a pretty good 30-second elevator pitch. What is it that makes this series really stand out in terms of science fiction? I mean, we've had a lot of late lost colonies, and I love a good lost colony story, like Pern, JR. Ha.
You mean that fantasy novel?
Oh, yeah.
It is not a fantasy novel.
Oh, okay. Continue. We don't want to
the Pern, Anne McCaffrey's Pern.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I lost some of the audio there. Yeah. Pern is sci-fi. See, I'm getting a teleprompter right there. I guess I'm supposed to read that.
No, it's a running joke. I tell her because it has dragons that it has to be fantasy, and she swears that you can play dragons.
Yeah,
it's a running joke.
It is very. I read it so long ago, but I can see that. I can see that being an ongoing argument.
I win.
Can you repeat some of that question, because my audio dropped there for a second?
Okay, so what is it that makes the Blue Sun Armada really stand out in science fiction?
I think it's going to stand out for a couple of reasons, and it's mostly going to be character based. I write really character driven stories, but so the main character is, and you have to forgive me because I pick crazy ass names for stuff. The main character is Duke Ron Marlborough. His actual name is Ron Marlborough, but we call him Ron Marlborough. And then his wife is Patricia Wilson Marlborough. But what makes it unique is that they're like a fantastic couple. They really get along, and they're both kind of badass, and they have this ongoing romance through it. Well, a lot of books, there's a romantic interest, but it's like they're trying to get to the point where they, get together. But it's really interesting to see how they do that and how they're managing this family. So it's, when I say it's a family saga, it's like literally a family going to space, except they happen to run this giant military household. And then so there's 4 great houses on Gildane is the planet they start on, and there's 4 great houses that are military households, and they are House Marlborough, House Spirit, House Bronk, and House Gerard, which is the king's house, and they all actually House Atana. So there's Gerard's different because it's the royal family, but what makes it unique is that it's the interaction between these characters and this kind of constant espionage or intrigue, not just on the political level, but like on the family level, because there's a marriage plot. The book actually starts off, there's a big battle in the beginning, but the book actually really gets going when Ron's son is going to court the woman he thinks he's going to marry. Her house betrays them and attacks them in a sneak attack, and the whole thing, and she doesn't know about it, or she's not party to it. But the deal is they want to get him to come court her because by tradition they leave their gates open during the courting process, and so then they attack, and then it starts this big family feud war, and then it goes on from there. But so I think that's what's unique is just the amount of characters and the things they do.
So, which tropes do you think you really took and played with in wonderful series or this wonderful book?
The tropes I like most is like one of my big influences actually is the Patrick O'Brien books, and they're not sci-fi obviously, but they're I think they're required reading at the Naval Academy, someplace they are in the military. But I like that kind of really formal kind of military bearing, and they have a sense of style with it. But then I also have like the rogue characters too. Like, so one of the main characters is an adopted son because he had no prospects, and this other lord had adopted him. Well, he's kind of like the Sandor Clegane type of character, except not quite as murderous, where he's he's trying to fight his way up. He's trying to improve his status in society. So he's from the bottom, but you also have the whole just the battle sense of them, the way they run things. I find fascinating.
So, what subgenres do you feel this fits into? I feel like it's a Lost Colony kind of story too.
It is definitely a Lost Colony. It's definitely an Exodus, an Exodus story, because it's a return to Earth story, but the first 3 books, they haven't gotten very far to get to Earth, so it's still kind of an Exodus story. It's probably an Exodus story that's going to become a return to Earth. I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase the tropes. I'm not really hitting it right. For some reason, I'm tongue-tied today. It's really a huge family military saga is the biggest trope with that.
So
there's go ahead.
So when you say family saga, do you mean that as the books progress, the main character changes to the next generation, or you just mean all of the family is there?
Well, a little of both, because by the time I get to finishing, it's going to be like a 9-book series. There's going to be some changes. So it depends. I guess by family saga, there's going to be some important things learned about Ron's father and his grandfather, and why he's in the situation he is because of their unique personality. So one of Ron's big things is he's trying to live up to his grandfather. So it'd be kind of like Paul Atreides trying to live up to Duke Leto. even though Paul's actually a lot bigger deal, as we find out. But you don't think you can live up to somebody like that. And then the family has to stay. The family saga part comes in where they have to stay alive, and then you'd be the next generation. And because to get to Earth, there was 1,000 years of travel, so there could, in theory, be quite a lot of saga. I'm not sure I'm going to take it that way because I don't know if I want to develop another 57 characters to do the next generation. We'll see what the readers want.
Fair.
So find his fan club and then tell him what you want after you finish this
book.
I
would love that. That'd be fantastic.
So just to brute force segue in my ADHD moment, your fan club is called the Moonbase, right?
Well, it's called the Scott Moonbase because it was called the Moonbase for a long time, and I realized there's another Facebook group, and it's called the Moonbase, and it's like run by NASA, and so they had a lot more followers than I did, and so I was like, I guess I won't try to compete with NASA. We'll call it the Scott Moonbase, and so that's what I went with.
I bet all those people in the
Only
NASA
competing with NASA to Elon Musk. He seems to be winning.
Oh,
I'm just
yeah.
thinking,
Definitely.
I'm sure everyone that's in the NASA group is like, man, I thought this was the Scott Moon group. Why are we here?
Like, what a ripoff. There hasn't been a new book here for a long time. They just talk about science all the time.
That pesky stuff,
Yeah.
So can you tell us a bit about your main character and what makes them really unique and stand out in the field of science fiction?
So I'm probably going to give you two. So the main character is Ron Marlborough. What makes him unique is he's because like nowadays a lot of it is there's a lot of talk about like I don't hate to say this, even like toxic masculinity, but he is a very masculine character, but in the good sense of the word. He loves his family, he loves his friends, he takes care of people. He does self-sacrifice. When he goes to war, goes to battle, it's not for himself. It's to protect people or save people or try and keep this whole civilization alive and to ensure democracy and all those types of things like that. He's a fascinating character because he has his inner self-doubts, but he also is very strong and able to push forward even though he has those insecurities, like we all do. Even the strongest has to be afraid or else they're not really much at stake. It's not a very interesting story if they're just like a Mary Sue from the beginning. So he's very interesting. I like him a lot. And then my second favorite character is his daughter, his oldest daughter. He has two daughters. And his oldest daughter's name is Fortune Marlborough, and she is a pilot. And she is, I guess she would be kind of like if Black Widow was a science fiction space pilot, then she would be kind of like her because she's very daring, very adventurous. She has a small team of pilots that she runs in her squadron, and they're a really tight group. So some squad level kind of stories there. And she's just interesting because she's the same way. She has well, I can't really give away why she's such a big deal in the story, but basically there's a problem with her genetics, and the king is interested in her genetics and wants to have a family merger that is not what she or her family wants. And so basically it's the subtext of what starts the war. And so she has some unique things to play in the next evolution of humanity through these characters. Because the thing is, they start off as cyborgs, so they become less and less cyborgs as they over the 10,000 years. And so they're getting to the point where, because they can reproduce, it's complicated, but they would have to make the story work. Because there's like some stories about, well, you just got good genetics and nanites from your grandfather. Like it's a normal thing to just have nanites that are transferred from one person to another. But so Fortune Marlborough's role in the story is that kind of like Dune, there's a lineage thing where they will become something different than either human or these cyborgs.
Okay.
Big mystery.
I'm down for it, though. So were there any secondary characters that were especially memorable to you? And if so, can you tell us a little bit about them?
Yes, I like Redian is... So in the very beginning of the book, Ron Marlborough and his and the rest of the houses, they've defeated a group of aliens that have been trying to take over the planet for a long time, called the Zesner. And so as a result of that, their leader, their champion, basically becomes Ron's best friend. And in the Zesner thing, he has to be the battle slave of the person who defeated him, although Ron doesn't see it that way. He keeps telling him he's not. But his friend becomes very loyal, and they have this like super mutual respect because they're both warlike cultures, and they go forward with that. Well, Redian is very interesting character. They call him Red Hot because they're different colors, and they're kind of tall, lanky, and their mechs always have 4 legs, so they kind of look more like a centaur when they're in their mechs. But Redian, he literally has a way hotter body temperature, so when you're around him, he's kind of uncomfortable to stand next to. Well, his nickname with all the guards and stuff is Red Hot, so he's a fun character. But he's really interesting. I really like writing kind of the alien side characters because I get to play with how they don't see things the same way as we do, and they make different assumptions, and they have just some surprising backstories usually. So that's probably one of my favorite secondary characters. I have a lot of favorite characters in this. We could probably go on for a long time.
Well, they're all your favorites. They're your babies.
I know. They are. They are definitely my favorites.
So the I'm trying to think of how. So obviously we don't want any spoilers, but are there any bad guys that these main characters have to confront that you can tell us about?
There's a couple. So the biggest bad guy is not a spoiler. It's pretty right off the bat. You learn that King Gerard is a bad guy. There's some scenes that show him as being pretty sleazy and obviously very power hungry and obviously willing to wipe out the family that basically helped him win this war. So, and his name is King Gerard. And he is very interesting because he is actually, a skilled warrior and a skilled politician and has all the things he should be to be a good leader. But, it's just his ego and greed and stuff. It's like the common fall, too much power, too greedy. So he's a bad guy. There's also a character that's basically, I call him the mutant king, because one of the problems with this exodus is they have a lot of sabotage and they have to leave abruptly. So they leave on this exodus that's going to take them across the galaxy, and they don't have all the ships, they don't have all the supplies, a lot of things are broken, and they go to this long abandoned mining station, which is basically like a giant Death Star, like a mining space station, and they try to reclaim it. Well, they realize when they get there, the reason it's been gone offline is because there's this basic alien bacteria that can kind of mimic human life that's there, and they get into the planet. They get into it's called the Exactus Meridius is the name of the station, and they have to fight this bacteria menace. And they come across as humanoids, but when you kill them, they don't really die very well. So it's a big problem. So the mutant king, and they do things like they make a barricade. They'll make a barricade, but then they'll like grow humans on the front of the barricade that are like bolted to it, so you don't want to shoot them because you're not sure if they're like alive and it's really horrible. So scariest environment imaginable. That's all I had to say. And,
so go ahead.
No, and so that's enough. That's a big arch villain.
So is this story, the style, the way you've told this one, is this grimdark like your urban fantasy, or is this more lighthearted?
I would like for it to be grimdark, but for some reason I don't ever go quite as dark as George R. R. Martin. So it is pretty harsh. I don't murder off lots of characters. Some obviously are going to be in peril and maybe or maybe not die. The Mutant King stuff is pretty grim, but it's more like you're watching Aliens, that type of thing. I love the movie Aliens, obviously.
Excellent taste.
Yeah, it's a good one. That's definitely a formative part of my creative development. So it's darker, but the characters, I don't have a lot of characters who are like shitty. You know what I mean? Like a lot of the characters in George R. R. Martin, they're not good people. They have moments where they do good things and you want them to be good and you're like, this character's going to turn around and be a good person, but then they don't. My characters aren't like that. I find that too depressing when I'm actually writing it, although I do like to read it. So it's a little bit more lighthearted than that, but it's definitely going to be lots of action, lots of shooting and blowing things up, and catastrophic injuries and maybe some people dying and those types of things in my space battles.
So rivers of blood run through it. Outstanding. So speaking
Oh
of
yeah, and
characters,
and sometimes when zero gravity, rivers of blood become clouds of blood. You just never know.
I actually, trying to figure out the scientificness of that actually got me in some trouble with law enforcement. So I don't know if I ever told you, like, when I wrote my first series, there was a scene with a sword battle in space. Why not, right? School factor.
Yeah,
And the
sure, do it.
publisher was like, that's not how physics works. Like, that's not how a body would react in zero G. You need to do a little more research and fix that one scene. So I called my aunt, who's an ER nurse, and we were talking about what happens when you decapitate someone. And apparently the people at the Starbucks started giving me weird looks and scooting away. And next thing I know, I have Officer Friendly standing in front of me wanting to know what I'm planning.
Yeah. Oopsies,
So
that's just so awkward.
Well,
Yeah,
luckily his wife was a writer, so it worked out. I actually still talk to him occasionally, although his
yeah,
wife
good.
writes those kinds of stories. So that's more in keeping of like Lethal Weapon, the character,
Right. Yeah,
those
for
kind of
sure.
stories. But
Yeah,
speaking of characters, you've just told us how horrible you are to them. You make them fight these mutant bacteria and all
yeah.
the things. So if they met you in a back alley after knowing who you are as D. Scott Moon, the one who put them through all this torment, how do you see that interaction playing out? Are you dead in 3 seconds or 12?
I see me running a lot, probably before they knew who I was. Why did that guy suddenly run away? Or I'd have to just sit there and take it because I probably deserve it. I mean, let's be honest.
All right, but would you ask for their autograph first? Like, I
Oh
knew I
yeah, for
made you
sure.
up. This is super cool.
Hey, thanks. Say, you know what? Before we do this, can you tell me a few things? I got some ideas about the next book, and maybe we could have your input. Maybe we can make a deal here. Work your way through that. See how that goes,
I don't.
and maybe
I
they could at
don't think
least
anyone
they could
is.
at least give me some powered armor to make it evil to make it equal. I mean, I should be able to defend myself. I should at least get a chain sword and some powered armor to defend myself. That would
Doc,
only
I
be
think
fair.
this is the first one we've actually had a guest say that they would basically play hostage negotiator.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You know
I know
what?
some hostage negotiators.
Good luck with that. He should know all their buttons to press.
This
Yeah,
is true.
yeah,
So rather than you guys stare at the blank screen because it got dark on Scott and then
yeah.
Doc had to
Sorry
step
about
away for a
that.
second, you're fine. We're just throwing up the cover to finish this out just because it's easier on
Oh, cool.
everybody.
Yeah,
But since we're talking about characters, when you write, do you have a favorite character archetype you like to use?
I have a couple. So I like the Guardian archetype because it's easiest for me to write, and I just like to see people do. And I find the Guardian archetype a heroic archetype, and I think it's used more than people realize. Like I'm trying to think of a good example. John McClane is a Guardian archetype because he'll suffer immensely to try and protect the people that matter to him. That's really the long and short of it. But I also like the archetype of people that are trying to find their way in the world against, all odds. So, kind of young adults. One of my favorite characters in the Blue Sun Armada things is a character named Penelope Danestar. And Penelope Danestar is the woman that Victor Marlborough was courting. And her parents are idiots. They're really good corporate, but they're not good with military intrigue. And they basically cause all these problems. Well, they eventually die in a horrible ship accident. It had to happen. And she becomes the leader of her house, and she gets put in charge of taming the Exactus Meridius. So you got this like 20-year-old young woman who's not raised in a military house, trying to lead and subdue this horribly violent threat to humanity. And I like to see her growth, and how she overcomes some of these things and how she makes alliances and finds the mentors that she needs, because she of course eventually kind of becomes pretty good friends with Patricia Marlborough, but in an interesting way where that I feel would be more realistic, because a lot of times in books and movies people never ask help from the obvious person that could totally help them, and there's no reason for them not to ask for help, but it's just to make the plot harder. So I will have them, they have an interesting relationship, a mentor relationship. So those are my two: the Guardian, and then kind of the finding your way in the world character archetype.
Okay. So this is where we ask for a sneak peek at how the sausage was made. So were there any cool scenes or ideas that you had to cut from the first book that might show up later?
The most interesting one is, so as we talked about a little bit earlier, there's the everybody on Gildane, the generations it took to get there were cyborgs, reproducing cyborgs, but there was one pod of like cryo people that have no cybernetics, and they were, and when they first inhabited and started taming this world, they basically had their own island. So they're just like normal people. And they live in this little, it's called the island of Amern, which was like a bastardization of America because, 10,000 years, words change. And so I really would like to write stories or a spinoff of them, because their intake or their experience with like going to the continent and constantly being overpowered by their creation, and they don't really know the whole story either. But so they go to the mainland where everybody's a cyborg, even though they don't look like them, and everybody's stronger, everybody's faster, everybody lives 3 times as long as they do, and how they deal with that world and compensate. So I think that'd be a pretty cool story.
Okay, I'm down for it. I'll read that too. But finally, what can you tell us? Sorry, heartburn medicine. Didn't mean to eat on the show. But the miniseries, the worlds where the story is told is as much a character as the antagonist and the protagonist. So why don't you give us a hint of what we can expect from this world? So it sounds like the world, they're leaving that pretty quickly, correct?
Yes. But it's never going to leave them,
So you don't show a lot about what happened after they left. So that's where you're talking about the story about the Amern come from?
Right. And so in the Amern, in this fleet that flees, they wind up getting a ship or part of a ship. And so they're in the third book, there's a scene where Ron realizes they have to reclaim this kind of like this outpost, and he realizes, and there's some build up to it, that he's going to need them because Ron is not going to have the genetic code to get through some of the security checks, and so he needs like basically somebody who's just a normal person, and so he's got to bring them on this mission and keep them alive because they're so fragile compared to how all of his people are, and so so there's that aspect. But the interesting thing about Gildane, the world, it's very Earth-like, but it doesn't really it kind of has its own. It doesn't really want them there either. So nature's kind of always against them there. But really, the world is going to mostly be ship life, which I find really challenging to write. That's one of the things I realized I had committed myself to a lot of ship living. So I have dealt with it in 2 ways. They have different sizes of ships, obviously, and some big ships. You have your generation type ships and whatnot. But then they have the Exactus Meridius, which they're going to convert into a ship and take with them, and it's literally the size of a world. And they're going to have to tame that throughout the series, and until they get it to where it becomes this whole, basically, world in space. And there's lots of potential for that because there's hundreds of levels to it.
So is this going to be like an O'Neill cylinder, or is this literally just spaceship? I mean, do you have like anti-gravity and all and the like, or is this zero? Like how do you have the tech?
Yeah, they have some I mean, and I don't go super deep into the science, but they do have gravity. You can lose gravity, but they have a couple of different ways they deal with the gravity, and to have it on ships large and small. And then the part of their journey is, because it was going to take them 1,000 years to find the blue sun or the blue world, until they find some technology from some of this other races that can become involved as they go. And they've basically got these rings that they can fabricate around their ships that are kind of like, their jump gates basically. And so that will get them places faster. Well, the challenge is how to get a jump gate big enough for the Exactus Meridius. So there's some plot complications with how to figure that out. But yeah, the main thing, so the world it's a world in space. Now, the nice thing is the further I go with the series, I'm planning to them encounter other worlds, and then they will explore new worlds, which I always find I do that a lot in the Reaper series, where they come to a new world and they got to go explore it, and it's totally different than the last one. I find that fascinating.
Before we move on, I do have in many so you mentioned a little bit of the inspiration was Battlestar Galactica, and in that one it was very, I don't want to say grim dark because that's not the right word. Mm-hmm. The ship atmosphere was very dingy and dirty, and it was obvious that they were, on ships that were past their prime. Is that what it's like in your series, or are the ships well maintained? Like, what kind of ambiance do the ships put off, just the living there?
It really depends on which ship you're on. So some of the ships are brand new, some of the ships are really old. Some of the ships are converted freighters that they've tried to make into like either a farm ship or something, and the ships are very damaged. So the main ship, the flagship, is the Indomitable, and it has been almost completely destroyed twice. And the Zesner, who spent a lot more time in space more recently than our main characters, they're really good at fixing ships. And so the ship's all torn apart, but lots of parts of it are brand new. You know, they're kind of unfinished and super bright, and everything's really clean because they had to literally just rebuilt it on Tuesday. You know, one of those things. So there's a couple of different variations, and then each house has their own ships. Some have more than others, and they will all kind of have their own decor, I guess, for lack of a better term. So there'll be lots of chances for different types of ambiance when they do delegations to other ships.
So you now have 3 books out, but
Yes.
It sounds like, did you say 9 is what you were thinking earlier?
I have 9 book covers. I'm a chronic book cover buyer, and so I kept buying every year or so. So I bought some books on that Tom Edwards had to his pre-mades, and he has like 3 levels. So I managed to get some of those, but then I also contracted some and had them designed. So all of the covers aren't out yet. But if you go to the Scott Moon base, the cover for book 4 is there, and that's a mech, and it's a Tom Edwards mech. And at the time, he hadn't done mechs, and so he basically made this mech template for me. And so to make binds, so a lot of the covers are mech covers, and then a lot of the covers are big space battle covers because they're going to run into some space battles as they go through this journey. And so I keep collecting covers, and so I'm like, I love the idea, and so I basically outlined the 9 books. It sounds crazy, but I literally have a problem buying book covers. I buy so many book covers I can't use, and then I'll outline the right, because I want to write all the books. I'll see a book cover and want to write it because I'll be like, this could be a great story, and then I'll think about it for a couple of days. I'm like, okay, here's the story, and then I will do a rough outline of that so that I can kind of like get it out of my system. So I have lots of those laying around. Maybe someday they'll all get written into books, and then I'll have like 1 trillion books, and nobody will know where to start.
That's what always amuses me when you get those authors or the new authors that'll ask you, how do you get your ideas? And I'm like, what are you talking about? How do you make them stop?
Yeah, no, I that's my biggest problem is, and so like I write really fast because I want to retire and write full time, and we have this discussion in my writers groups and stuff. But the real reason I write fast, the biggest reason is because I started this story and I want to finish it, but now I got 5 other stories and I want to finish those stories too. And so for me, it's always a battle to finish all these stories. You know, because I have 2 or 3 thrillers I've started. I have some urban fantasies I've started. I have more military space opera and cyborg things. I really need to focus.
So, sometimes there are authors that'll die, and after they die, like books just keep coming out because somebody's writing them and saying, "Oh, look, we just found another novel in their trunk."
My plan.
It'll be
my exact plan.
You, that's gonna be like the first time it's like, no, for real, they really in his trunk. There's 27 more.
Yeah, well, because I'm actually I want to retire from my current job pretty soon here, and so one of my things is I'm trying to write like a couple of full series and not publish them at all, and so I'm going to finish the rest of the Blue Sun Armada series, and I'll have that ready to go so that when I start launching them, they will come out closer together than the first 3 did. And then I have 2 or 3 other series that I'm going to try to finish over the next year or 2, so that when I retire, if I start getting scared that I'm not making enough money, I can always just launch a series that's already done. And that makes me sound like a lunatic, but that's just what I'm doing.
The best kind, though, because you provide Doc and I with books. So
actually, it makes a lot of sense. I know Mel Todd, when she did the Twisted Luck, she insisted on having 3 of the books completely done, and then she had outlined more. So before she even published the first one. So I think with the way readers can be so voracious these days, particularly, it's not a bad idea.
People like to binge, and I think Netflix taught us that. But it also gives me the freedom to work on things that aren't making me money right now. Like, I don't make any money with urban fantasy, but I still enjoy writing it. And so I can write one and it doesn't interfere with anything else. I always write on my most important books first, and then if I have time later, I write a little bit more.
So I've actually just started reading in some urban fantasy. So we'll have to have you back on a different interview to talk about the urban fantasy because I find that subject fascinating. But
My urban fantasy is going to be a lot different than what's out there right now, and that's kind of by design, and it may commercially fail, but I'm still going to write it the way I want to write it. So
there you go. All right, Doc, I'm sorry to interrupt you again.
No, I think there's been a big push for, I've seen some more urban fantasy doing really well that is less lovey-dovey romancy.
That's exactly, yeah, because I don't write good romance. I tried to write some romance books, and it just didn't work that well. I mean,
I'm
fine.
kind of somewhat allergic to human romancy emotions, so it works better for me not to have them. But every universe has its own internally consistent science, and you definitely have, even though you claim not to be a sciencey fancy person, you definitely have a structure in place. So what kind of science could we expect from these books?
So from the Blue Sun Armada books, I mean, I always struggle with the same types of things. So to write space opera or military, so my opinion, space opera is one of the key tropes of space opera is you go to lots of planets. You know, you're always going to different places like Star Wars or Firefly or things like that. Whereas military sci-fi could, in theory, happen in one planet, but usually, most stuff I've read, there's some space travel. So you always, as a sci-fi author, you always struggle with the same things like how do they do space travel? How do they have weapons? Because I think actually having a plasma weapon, I think scientifically, some stuff that I've read, it would be extremely hard to have an actual plasma gun, and lots of other things. But you could, in theory. So sci-fi just has to be maybe possible in the future. So you have to structure all those things. So the science in this one, I'm trying to be consistent with the difficulty of space travel, give some reasonable, some realism towards what the space battles would be like while still having fun. So like if you read David Weber and some of those others, their space battles are really slow and long range because that's probably how it would be because you're probably shooting your weapons.
He can fit in the waves of missiles.
Yeah, exactly. Waves of missiles. But I also want to have some fighter pilots, which is probably a really dumb thing to have in space. But I'm going to have them anyway, because one of the reasons it's dumb to have a fighter pilot in space is because the G's would kill them. Well, all my characters are cyborgs that are made to handle that kind of crap, so they can do some pretty nasty space battle maneuvers and things like that. So there's cybernetics. You'll go into some explanations about how the nanites replicate and then are passed on through birth, because I really wanted to have a legacy, so they had to be able to reproduce as cyborgs. When I first started, I'm like, this is going to be a tough sell. But the more I write it, I think it actually kind of makes sense that why couldn't you pass on some self-replicating? Because nanites don't have to be made out of metal. I mean, they can be made out of any type of substance that can be manipulated by the programming. And so that's kind of how those things go. And like one of the things you talked earlier about Ron, one of the reasons Ron's interesting physically is that he's had so much damage to him. He's had some weird adaptations. So like he has like metal bands that have grown around his torso to kind of support his inner abdominal cavity, so he doesn't blow out his back for the 10th time and things like that. So they have some weird mutations based on my very scientific understanding of how things work.
So of all the tech you invented, which one would be the one that you're like, I will take that and I will use it today and in this universe?
Definitely the medical nanites, because and my characters can take a lot of abuse and come out of a battle where they should have died feeling like they have a hangover. So that's pretty handy. It makes you able to punish your characters so much more. And as a person right now, I got some knee and hip pain for the last 6 years. I would like to go away, and some nanites fixing that up would be great. I would love that.
See, you're all being responsible. So now I feel bad asking, how would you abuse that tech?
Well, yeah, I'd obviously use it to be a superhero or something. I mean, that's the way you would go with that type of tech. Although I do have what I call them. I do have powered swords too. So originally I started writing them, and I realized I was using chain swords, which is a little too Warhammer 40K.
Warhammer
So
40K.
yeah, so now they have some powered swords, which are basically, they're more like, instead of being like a chainsaw sword, they're more like, what are those kitchen knives that kind of go back and forth, oscillating knives like that, but at a really high speed. So we have some of those things. I might take one of those because that would be terrifying if somebody tried to attack you and you whip that thing out. You probably wouldn't want to fight you anymore. So
I can imagine they wouldn't. So you already covered the fact that you have aliens in your universe, but can you tell us a bit about what kind of inspired how you want the aliens, how you went about them, making them? Were they nightmares, too much coffee, watching aliens too often?
So the aliens are interesting because at first I just started, I wanted to have these aliens they're fighting against, but then as I'm like, okay, what would their mechs look like? Well, I'm like, well, they're different. They walk and they're bipedal like humans, but their mechs are always have 4 or more legs, and so they just think differently. But so I was like, well, I got to make them different. So how can they be different but same? And so they're taller, they're lankier, they're strong, but they don't look like a muscular human because the way their muscle insertions work on their skeleton. They run at a different temperature and some things like that. And then some of them that I run into, they have like 6 sets of eyes, but they're kind of like human eyes. They're kind of disturbing to look at, to be honest. But then I was like, well, why are they here? Why are they fighting against the humans? And basically, there's a big miscommunication. Whereas the Zesner were sent by another race called the Talgar, who know about the whole thing about the real humans and these cyborgs. They call them near humans. And that's the first clue that they're not actually human. Is the Zesner his Zesner friend keeps calling him a near human. He's like, that's really offensive. Why do you call me a near human? I'm human. Give me a break here. But when Ron tries to think about what that actually means, that he might not be human, it basically shuts you down and you have like crippling whole body migraines and stuff like that. So their program keeps them from facing the truth. And but so the aliens, how I developed them is I wanted to be a certain culture. I developed kind of what their goals were, what their culture was trying to do, and the fact that they were basically also star travelers who've come a very long ways and lived in space, and now they're having to fight on these planets and how they adapt to that. And it's mostly like, this is an alien race who's smarter than we are. This is the environment they have to survive. How would they adapt? So I guess that's a shorter answer of how I develop my aliens. And then I always go, okay, now how can I make them less human? Because they would probably be not very human if we ever met somebody from, multiple star systems away from ours, as far as how they think.
Do you dive in at all into how long it takes that cultural drift to happen? I mean, obviously you've set this exponentially into the future, but have you thought about that? And does it come up at all? Like how long it took that cultural drift to happen?
I make some references, but basically the closest I narrow it down is that they've been at this for 10,000 years. And I don't go a lot beyond that, but I also throw in there that the speed of which they're having evolution is different because technology has been thrown into the works. And then I also you're never really told exactly how old Ron and Patricia are by normal Earth biological standards, but you get the feeling that they're probably a couple hundred years old, but they kind of look like 40-year-olds. And that's just the way they do. And so when they die of old age, it's a little different than we die of old age. And usually they die because somebody kills them. But eventually they're going to wear out and their nanites will give up or go offline by some sort of predetermined code or something like that. But so what you're told basically is they've been doing this thing for 10,000 years. They're not the same as when they started, and they probably lived 200 or 300 years each. And they have their own personal changes they go through in their life. They actually change during their lifetime, like I talked about with all the modifications to kind of protect his body because he keeps getting injured. And that goes for how they think and how they express emotions too, because you have to remember that all of their emotions are technically simulated emotions. And so one of the things, I don't know if I answered it in the story, but I am very fascinated by it, like, what is the difference between an emotion and a perfectly simulated emotion? And so when you deal with the two main characters who are deeply in love and committed to each other, Ron and Patricia, is that real? And does it matter?
That's a deep question. That's part of the fun of sci-fi.
I know.
I was thinking about that
Yeah,
stuff. Like
it is.
they cover that really well in the Expanse series about how cultural drift happens. So, did you address if they are machine? Are they weak to EMPs, or do you take that into account when they're designed?
Yeah, they're going to have some problems with that. They're going to have some problems with that when they meet the humans, because the humans are going to send a shutdown order, and what's the only thing that's going to save them is that they have all these Zesner with them, and it doesn't affect the Zesner because the Zesners are not part of that. And this generation of children from Gildane, like, so Ron's youngest daughter Penelope, she's like 10, and she runs around with these Zesner kids all the time. She's kind of like Arya from Game of Thrones, but not as murderous because she hasn't been put in that situation yet. But
Yet.
yeah, you never know what's going to happen with these things. But so there's a scene that I'm working on in the next book where the humans basically they decide they don't like the way that their creations have gone, and they said, well, we have a plan for this, we're sending the shutdown order, and they basically turn them all off or try to, but it doesn't affect the Zesner. Some people like Ron are more resistant because they've mutated away from the original creation, so the shutdown doesn't affect them as well as it should, but it still knocks them down and they can't function. Well, so there's a period where the fleet is completely run by Zesners, who are the conquered, and the children. And so Peps is like basically thrust in this place of leadership, and she's 10, and she's got to like help lead this entire armada and get all the adults woke up so they can fight off this massacre that's coming.
All right, dude, you sold me already. All right, so is this tax deductible if I buy your books? I'm just asking for a friend.
I think it is. It's research for science fiction writing.
There we go.
Yeah.
So I'm good. Hey, Doc, you can make it research for the podcast. We'll call it all tax deductible.
There you go.
Did you say tax or Dax?
Tax.
Oh, neither one is wrong. Tax deductible is great, whatever that is.
Yeah. All right. So clearly, this interview is winding down as she mocks my pronunciation yet again. But is there anything we didn't ask you about the Blue Sun Armada that you want to tell us about before we move on?
No, you guys are doing great. You have great questions. This has been probably one of my favorite interviews I've done for a very long time. I mean, I could obviously just start. If you let me loose, I will bore you to death because I'll tell you, I'll probably talk about it all night. But I really love this story. And the thing about this is a passion project that I've been writing between other projects for a couple of years, actually since about 2018, so 4 years now. And I really like it, and I hope people give it a chance and they like it too.
So is this out in audiobook as well, or is this just ebook and paperback right now?
I'm still working on the audiobook. I have a few possible audiobook publishers, but we haven't got to an agreement on how or when that's going to be done.
Okay. So nobody's going to read it to you. You're going to have to read it to yourself, people, but it is out there and you should buy it because it sounds amazing. So this is the part where we wind up, and I remind you, dear listener, to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right book. So do that thing, people. Hop over on Amazon, leave a review. Is this just an Amazon exclusive, or is it everywhere?
It's Amazon exclusive right now. It's an ebook, paperback, and hardback.
Okay, so you can also hop over on Goodreads and BookBub and all the other sites to leave reviews. And if that's not enough for you, you can start a blog and leave a book review there and say all the best things about it, and Scott will love you forever. And he might even write you if you write a good enough review.
That's true. So, it's science.
Yeah, it's I hear for every review he gets 5 more minutes to torture another rookie, and that's how it works, right?
Yeah, and they need to be tortured. Let's be honest.
They had it coming for sure, but
yeah, they definitely earned that.
So do rookies talk about like boots in the military, like this one time at boot camp? Do rookies bit like this one time at the police academy? Is that a thing?
Yeah, that's the one time. But did you die? That type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I say that whenever anyone complains about my driving, but did you die? So
did you die?
Yeah. So as we wrap this up, can you tell listeners how they can find you? And as usual, it'll be in the show notes, people.
The best way is I have a webpage, scottmoonwriter.com. You can also go to the Scott Moon Base on Facebook and jump in there, and we can talk and joke and have a good time.
All right, outstanding. He is a fun guy, so you should do that, people. You can find us over on the Twitters at twitter.com/SF_fantasy_show. twitter.com/SF_fantasy_show. You can email the show at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. You can join us on Facebook where all the shenanigans happen at facebook.com/groups/Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, /groups/Blasters and Blades Podcast. You can join the website over at anchor.fm/Blasters Tack and Tack Blades. Again, anchor.fm/Blasters Tack and Tack Blades. Where as little as 99 cents a month, you can help keep the lights on, and that's duly appreciated. So if you want to help keep the insanity rolling, we would appreciate it. And if you're noticing a theme, just about anywhere you look for us on the interwebs, it will be as Blasters and Blades or Blasters and Blades Podcast. And finally, if you want to support the show over at buymeacoffee.com, you could do that. It's buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Put in the comment section that is for the podcast, and I promise I will keep Doc Cisca and Nick Garber duly intoxicated. They will drink water until their intestines explode. That didn't work. I'll work on the better transition, people. I just don't want you to think we're all alcoholic, because we're not.
Right. There's other things to drink.
There's other things to drink.
Shh, JR, thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For the absentee Nick Garber, the apparently very confused, especially tonight, J.R. Handley. I'm Cisca. This was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back same time, same place next week, where we indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, torturing, and JR, because that's the best part.